Hello and welcome to this episode of the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference specials. Today I have Ronia Fraser with an interview about narcissistic abuse recovery. And Ronia is a specialist in this field. She's going to explain to us how this came about and why she does what she does and what she does. So hi and welcome, Ronia. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So tell us about yourself. How did
Wow,
you?
tell you about myself. It's not
Okay.
like I was planning on becoming a narcissistic abuse expert, so it found me.
Yeah.
And um, I mean, now it's quite a while ago. It's been 8 years.
Hmm.
And so basically, back then I was a chartered accountant with an MBA. I did like everything you're supposed to be doing with like this finance career, and got involved with the wrong man again. And that time, the difference was that it cost me pretty much everything. It cost me my job, it cost me my house, it cost me my health, my sanity, it cost me myself, and it almost cost me my life. And as a result of that, I was very much struggling with my mental health, which for me was new.
Yeah.
And um, back then I was living in LA at that time, and I was working in the music industry, and I was living my dream life, if you will, like all the sunshine and the palm trees. And it took me quite a few years to actually create this life for myself. And then that all came crashing down, and I literally ran for my life, and I dropped everything that I had built
Mm.
in the US. But I was very unwell. My mental health was not functioning at all. I wasn't functioning. I couldn't work. It was really bad. And I obviously wanted to get better, but back then, it wasn't a thing like it is now. Whereas now you find so much information on Google. Back then that wasn't the case. So it was really like putting puzzle pieces together. And the thing is, when you don't know what you're dealing with, you also don't have the language, right, to explain, to make yourself understood. And I, of course, wanted to get better, but there was literally no help available. Like I was just written off as this lost cause and an extremely sad case. And oh, poor woman, broken heart, time will heal all wounds. All
Mm.
this well meaning advice, which actually for narcissistic abuse survivors doesn't apply. And everybody who's experienced it knows that.
Hmm.
And I got to a point where I just got so frustrated with the lack of results I was getting from traditional therapy. And I would go religiously, right? I would go every week. And if you put, at least for me, if I put my time and my money and my tears and my efforts into something, I want to see something change. And that just didn't happen. And when I addressed that with my therapist, who was very kind, it was nice to have her in my corner, but it just wasn't enough.
Hmm.
And I shared my frustrations with her, and I was just like, when am I gonna see results? And she's like, well, unfortunately, that's what your life is now. It's something you need to accept, and we need to find ways to manage it. And I was at a point where I couldn't have promised you I'd still be live the next day. So it absolutely was nothing I could accept. And that's when I ventured out. I basically went on a mission to find something that could reverse the damage as effectively as it was caused. Because in my head, I was thinking, well, it went that way, right? Like something happened to me that turned me into this mess. It went this way. So there has to be a way that goes the other way.
Yeah.
And I guess because I was literally at the end of my road, I had nothing left to lose. If I had died in the process of finding this something, I would have been okay with that as well.
Mhm.
But of course, my motivation was to live.
Yeah.
And I stumbled across NLP, I stumbled across hypnosis, havening techniques. Like, that's what happens when everything you try doesn't work, like all the, accepted things don't work. Your mind expands, you become open to alternatives. And that was then literally a lifesaver for me. And that's what brings me to, what I'm doing today.
Mhm. Okay. So you're obviously going to talk about all the strategies and all those ways and explain from an objective point of view, what narcissistic abuse is, etc. But would you mind telling us how you got into that situation, just as in a subjective way, so that people who are watching this, if they are in the same situation, they can understand what they're going through and maybe see their own situation in it and find a way out. And also so that everyone, because we have lots of hypnotherapists on this call right now, and guys, you can, by the way, you can ask questions,
Yes, please
who
ask
might
questions.
just put them in the chat, I'll read them out. And so for them to understand, if they haven't gone through it, because if you haven't gone through it, you can't understand it.
No, you cannot. No.
It's like having kids and giving tips for kids' education, basically. Sorry. But so could you just go into that? Like, how did you, get into that relationship? Where did it start? Did it start with meeting the wrong person, or did it start earlier, and how did it develop?
Well, I didn't realize what I was dealing with, right? So for me, that particular relationship came out of the blue. I was introduced through a mutual friend. So your guard is already down, right? Because it was really like, oh, you should meet that guy. He's amazing. And it was my, at that time, best friend. And, so you have like this instant um, trust. Well, not really trust, but, you're less reserved when somebody gets introduced to you through a friend. And in the beginning, it wasn't love at first sight. He did nothing for me, absolutely nothing. And 2 days later, he was my everything. And I didn't even realize what was happening there. He was just very smooth, and they say all the right things. And it's what we call love bombing, they put you on a pedestal, they love everything about you. And they're very observant, right? And they are very open. So we would spend hours just talking, and we would share the same insecurities, the same fears. We would share things from our upbringing, our lives, and everything was just so similar, where very, very quickly I actually thought I had met my soulmate. And that is part of the whole illusion that a narcissist creates. And what's really happening there is actually that they match and mirror you to such an extent that you fall in love with yourself.
Yeah.
And that's how but none of that is real, obviously, but that's how they become that most amazing person you've ever met in your life. But then, of course, over time, all the things that he loved about me so much, he started to despise. And there would be like those jabs, and it would be like, oh, I'm too German. Like he has to cheat on me with that woman because she's so much more fun. She's less German because us Germans we're so rigid and whatever, like things like that really kind of also attack you on your personality, on your identity. And it almost happened overnight, because I didn't even realize what was happening. I thought I was the problem. Like all of a sudden I had anxiety 24/7. I felt absolutely horrible about myself. I started hating myself. It was almost like losing the track of reality. There were things that I thought happened, and then supposedly they weren't. So gaslighting, it's a form of mental torture where your reality gets distorted to such an extent that you really think you're losing your mind. So there was a lot of that happening, where I couldn't trust myself anymore. I didn't know what was real anymore. There were things I was told that supposedly I did, when I would go like, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't even sound like me. But because I was losing my mind already anyway, I was questioning it. Did I actually do that? And then you start believing it. So there was a lot of manipulation that was happening, and it happened so quickly. I didn't realize that I was actually being abused. I thought I was the problem. And because when all of this happened, my first thought was, obviously I realized that something was very wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And my first thought was like, oh, Hollywood got to me after all. So at that time, I had been in Hollywood for 6 years. And Hollywood obviously has that reputation, that it destroys people. It's the city of the fallen angels. And I just thought I was another fallen angel. I didn't realize that actually it would be my boyfriend who's actually doing that to me. I didn't make that connection. That took quite some time. And what I realized later was, oh, this actually wasn't the first time. And then I went back and I realized, like, even my first boyfriend when I was like 16, from 16 to 21, that already fell very much into the what we nowadays would call narcissistic abuse, coercive control. Like today he would be in jail, but back then it was just like, oh, Ronnie has a bit of a difficult boyfriend. It was just brushed off. It wouldn't have been talked about the way it is now.
Yeah. And how did it go on? So you started being manipulated, gaslit, etc., and
Yeah.
your self-confidence, everything probably took a big hit over time.
Yeah.
How long did that continue, and when did you come to a turning point?
Um, like that relationship went on for about 8 months, which in the grand scheme of things actually isn't that long. But if you think about the fact that I crashed and burned literally within a few days, 8 months obviously becomes a very long time.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I knew if I didn't get out now, I wouldn't survive another 4 weeks. So either he would have done something to me or he would have made me do something to myself, which then obviously I would have looked like another crazy woman in LA. Nobody would have bet an eyelid, like he would leave knives lying around, things like that for me to do his dirty work. And I was very fortunate that I clocked it, because I think it was actually my work that kept me sane, that
Mhm.
kept me like, I wasn't sane anymore, but that part that still was functioning in my brain, where I went like, what is going on here? Because I stopped trusting myself. I got rid of all sharp objects in the house and everything.
Mm.
And every time he left, after, of course, being very emotionally and psychologically abusive, he would leave like a box cutter or a knife behind. And I'm like, okay. And if I don't get out now, and I tried to move and he found me, and so I knew that I had to actually leave. I needed to get out. And within a few days, I dropped everything that I had built for myself and went back to Germany.
Mhm.
And I'm from the countryside in Germany. So first, of course, it was good because I was at my parents' house. It's a safe space, and then I started reaching out for help, which was very difficult to do because I'm that kind of person, and everybody thought that as well. Oh, Ronnie is just going to figure it out. Nobody took it seriously how in what a bad state I actually was.
Mhm.
And I went to a doctor. The doctor was just belittling me, and not taking me seriously at all. And that's when I then made a decision. I had to go back to the city. So I went back to London. I had lived in London for 10 years. And I thought it would be easier to find help there. But unfortunately, at that time, there still wasn't the right help available, which is still a challenge today.
Yeah. Okay, so you didn't you came to a point, did you still think it was you were to blame, or did you like suddenly decide, no, actually, did something
Well,
switch and
at
realize?
some point, I realized, hold on a second, this wasn't me
Mhm.
at all. And I remember there was like this one book, because back then there was nothing really, which was called Psychopath Free.
Mhm.
And I can remember when I found that book, when I read that book, I had to put it down every now and then because it made me physically sick, because it was literally like somebody had sat on my shoulder and I'd written a book about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do they know? And that's when I then, stumbled across gaslighting. When you put the pieces together, and I actually had another, not even relationship, but I got involved with another man basically right afterwards, where I was looking for a rescuer, really. I was looking for somebody that proved me wrong, that I was actually lovable, like all the wrong things. He turned out to be a narcissist as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But that helped putting the puzzle pieces together, because I started writing things down. I was writing with friends of mine. So I actually had things in writing. So when that gaslighting actually happened, I was like, no, what you are telling me, I know 100% is not the truth. And that's when things started falling into place.
Mhm.
But it took quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And then to continue your journey. So, I mean, you obviously went to NLP, hypnotherapy, etc. But how long did it take you from that point on to become better? You know, is it still a
Uh,
journey, or can you say, oh
it
no,
happened, it happened
that's
very quickly.
mhm,
But I guess because I was at a point, like obviously when we do our NLP training and things like that, it wasn't uh, at that time meant for trauma at all. But I was just looking for tools,
mhm,
and I just took what I was given and did what I had to do.
mhm,
And when I did my NLP master, and then I did the hypnosis training, and really, really, I had a coach and who was also trained in hypnosis and NLP. So I didn't do it on my own, right? I had support.
yeah,
Once I had the NLP and the hypnosis, it took me 5 months to be post-traumatic stress symptom free.
wow, that's quick.
And then that's what I put together because that's how my brain works. You know, I was able to put that together into an actual structured methodological approach. And
Yeah,
then I started working with clients, and then of course, you keep refining it. But the funny thing with narcissistic abuse actually is it's so complex, but at the end of the day, they all play by the same book.
mm,
Like the tactics that a narcissist uses is always the same. The symptoms that we experience as survivors are always the same, and the healing also actually follows the same motions.
mm,
Different timings, right? We all have our own healing timing, when the time is right for us, but the motions are very similar. So that's how I was able to put it together as like a very structured approach.
yeah. Okay. So you've put that approach together. You've got clients. Do you work exclusively with narcissistic abuse survivors,
Yeah,
or?
I don't do anything else.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So, but narcissism, I just want to clarify because
yeah.
obviously we talked a lot about relationships, right?
Mhm.
Which is probably the most, not necessarily most common one, but most talked about
Yeah.
kind of narcissistic abuse. But I just want to throw in there that it can happen anywhere, right? It can be a parent, it can be a sibling, it can be a friend, it can be in the workplace.
Yeah.
And the motions, however, are still all the same.
Yeah.
The impact is the same. So I don't only work with people that have had narcissistic relationships, I also work with people that had a narcissistic parent. Usually those go hand in hand anyway.
Yeah.
I work with people that have experienced narcissistic abuse in the workplace,
Mm.
which I mean, usually, you would call it bullying, but
Yeah.
it's the same thing. And it doesn't really matter who the narcissist is. And I don't care about narcissists at all. I spend literally zero time thinking about them, analyzing them, nothing.
Yeah.
What I care about is, okay, so what is the impact, and how can I support you to get out the other side of this?
Yeah. So the main focus, of course, for survivors should be to focus on themselves and what they can do to, well,
Yeah.
strengthen
And
themselves
and
to
that's a huge learning, right?
yeah.
Because how do we get into a situation like that? It's faulty conditioning, right? We earlier talked about the whole rescuer thing, when
Mm.
we want to save somebody with all this love we have to give, all this love we should be giving to ourselves, right? But
Mm.
because we've learned to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of love, that's obviously how we then end up in situations where we put up with unacceptable behaviors for the sake of love.
Yeah. And you of course, working with clients, how does that work for you? Like now for the hypnotherapists in this group, just
Mm-hmm.
explain. Do you do like the standard one session and you're ready to go, or how do you work normally?
So I offer only short-term programs,
Hmm.
because obviously we do really deep dive work.
Hmm.
So first of all, it's all about stabilizing the emotional well-being, because when somebody has experienced narcissistic abuse, the nervous system is completely dysregulated. They are in fight or flight. The brain, right, isn't functioning
Hmm.
properly at that point. The amygdala is firing off. So the very first step has to be regulating the emotional well-being so they can get their agency back, so the feet come back on the ground, removing emotional triggers. Because what a lot of narcissistic abuse survivors will do, they read all about it, right? And I haven't actually met anyone who couldn't write a PhD on it. They're like, all of us have like this really in-depth theoretical knowledge, but then they are still not getting better, right? And that's because they are stuck in the cognitive function. That's where hypnosis then comes in, right? Like we need the damage that's caused by narcissistic abuse. It's so deep. We need tools that help us access that damage on the same deep level that was caused. And that's where hypnosis obviously comes in.
Yeah.
And so stabilizing the emotional well-being. My sessions are usually an hour long, and the program is 6 sessions over 3 months. So 6 sessions, 3 months. And the reason why I don't actually do longer programs, of course, if somebody would like to extend, they can, but usually they don't, is I don't know where that person is going to be in 3 months' time. And because it's so targeted, it's highly effective, right? And that person, they don't know where they're going to be because they will not even recognize themselves. So that's why I do 3-month programs. And then after that, they can decide, some then keep coming for just normal life coaching, because all of a sudden, when we heal from the inside out, what happens is we become very authentically ourselves. But what comes with that is that the life that we knew will completely change. And then all of a sudden you're there painting on a blank canvas, right? Or somebody comes back for individual sessions, which are only available once somebody actually completed a program, if something comes up that they want to run an update on. And as I said, first of all, stabilizing the emotional well-being, so that person is actually functioning again and has more options available, regulating the nervous system. But then with narcissistic abuse, it's multi-layered because you have the trauma that has happened right now, that relationship, that work placement, whatever it may be. So that's what we need to deal with from a trauma perspective, because they're highly activated. But then what also is important with narcissistic abuse is to actually address the developmental trauma as well. Because if we have faulty programming running in the background, like, not feeling lovable or worthy, or not feeling good enough, which is a very universal faulty program, right? That a lot of people have running. Unless we run an update on that, it will happen again and again and again, which was the same with me, right? I didn't realize, but actually, hold on a second. The last 20 years, it was always the same kind of relationship I was in, like, so narcissistic abuse recovery is multi-layered, and we need to stabilize the emotional well-being to start with, to help the client to actually get back on their feet. But then it's equally important to really dive in and address the developmental trauma to make sure it won't happen again in the future. Because if you stop just after you've, stabilized their emotional well-being, they are very likely to be back within like 6 months or a year, because either they went back or they just found another person who's a different shade of narcissist that they hadn't quite figured out just yet.
Yeah, that's common, yes. So that's the faulty programming, developmental trauma. That's what you sort out in the next 4 or 5 sessions. Is that correct? Or,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So you don't have a set structure. Session 1 is this, session 2 is that, but you do also.
Usually they follow the same motions. But I'm not the client, right? So I'm not going to say in the first session, we're going to do this, in the second this, and the third this, because I never know who the person is that shows up to me. Because once we then start doing the healing work, actually the unconscious mind resolves a lot of things. Once it gets going, it resolves a lot of things anyway. And the client might even think, oh, next week or next session, this is what I want to work with. And the next session comes around and the unconscious mind has brought up something completely different, or life happened, something happened. And that's why I can sort of estimate where it's going because of my experience. However, I have no agenda with my clients other than providing them the tools that they need to do what they need to do, you know. So it's completely flexible, but usually they all go through the same motions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what, I mean, narcissistic abuse is kind of a pop psychology phrase now. So what are some of the misconceptions that people might have, that, you know, what is a survivor of narcissistic abuse, so to speak? What are those ideas, the false ideas that you come across, for example?
I mean, nowadays everybody is labeled a narcissist, right? Everybody who's ever hurt somebody's feelings in whatever way is labeled a narcissist. Every relationship all of a sudden is narcissistic. Every parent is narcissistic because the teenage child doesn't appreciate the parenting, you know? So I just did an article for the Telegraph about that. So when we talk about narcissistic abuse, it's not just a breakup, right? Every breakup hurts. But when we've experienced narcissistic abuse, the impact will be so much more severe because we're dealing with really severe mental health challenges. We're dealing with complex post-traumatic stress. And when I work with somebody, I have a very strict application process actually. And people need to answer those questions because it allows me to identify, am I actually dealing with a survivor or am I just dealing with somebody who had a heart broken, you know, because it presents in a very different way. So yeah, narcissistic abuse isn't just somebody is cheating on you or something like that. Narcissistic abuse is emotional and psychological abuse on the most sophisticated level, right? We've already talked about the calculated manipulation. There is identity erosion to the point you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror anymore, right? There's emotional blackmail, brainwash. It's very tactical. And I think the danger of what's happening right now with narcissistic abuse having become this pop psychology word is that it really takes away from the seriousness of the topic. And what I also see happening a lot is that people now use that, label somebody else as a narcissist, put the blame on them, so they don't need to take responsibility for themselves and for their healing, you know, especially like on social media. And that, of course, isn't the whole purpose of the exercise, because when we get involved with a narcissist, it's actually an invitation to really explore how, you know, like what brought us into this situation. Because the narcissist clearly had a carrot they were dangling in front of our nose, and we were so desperate to have it. So it's really about when somebody comes in, and now they will come in and go like, oh, for narcissistic abuse, right? So to me anyway, because it's what I do.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of therapists, hypnotherapists will have people that come in for help for that particular issue. It's really about understanding what it is that we are really talking about, to be able to categorize it and filter out the people that actually just jump on the bandwagon, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you would have people who think they're victims, they're not really, they're just, as you said, heartbroken. But do you get people who are the narcissistic part of a relationship, or whether it's work or a love relationship? Do you get the narcissist as well?
Very rarely. I've worked with people that have narcissistic tendencies. But usually by the nature of narcissism is they have a lack of self-awareness. So they wouldn't actually even consider that there is anything wrong with them.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I mean, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I do realize that they wouldn't show up for therapy. But no, I'm somebody who says my ex is a narcissist, help me. And then they show signs of being the narcissist themselves. That's what I mean. Do you get that?
No, what can happen, but again, I have this very strict application process, which filters a lot of people out that aren't suitable for my particular program. Usually it's not like they turn out to be the narcissist, but what can happen is that somebody is stuck in the victim mode. Usually I identify that before, and I will tell them, that they are not ready for the program yet. But every now and then, it comes with the territory. Somebody might sneak through, where then you might consider it the behavior quite narcissistic, because what does a narcissist do? They don't take responsibility for themselves. They blame others, right, for the circumstances, for the shortcomings, whatever. So if you could potentially call that whole victim mindset, like there's a thing called a vulnerable narcissist. So when somebody is in this really bad place, and then they are looking for this rescuer, putting their stuff on somebody else. So you may want to call that narcissistic, but I mean, I personally, I don't, I mean, healing work is tough, but I wouldn't work with somebody like that.
Yeah. So what are the signs that somebody's actually healing? What do you see as the first sign or the first signs that somebody is actually making progress?
Well, you can see it in the face. You can see it in the body language. You can see it in the breathing. So there are very obvious physical signs that will happen very quickly. And hypnosis is actually beautiful for that, because when you deal with somebody who is so highly traumatized, they haven't experienced a calm, peaceful state in a very long time, if ever, right? Because there are people that have never experienced that. So as you then introduce somebody to hypnosis, and they have this experience and they realize how easy that actually was, like accessing a state like that, the impact is very, very quick. I also use havening techniques. It's the first technique I teach every single one of my clients, because that's a tool where they can self-regulate should something come up. And there will always be things that come up. It's life. It's about being able to be self-sufficient and deal with adverse situations. So you can, as I said, there are physical signs that you can see straight away. Usually the sleep improves, which also comes with the regulating of the nervous system. But then also when we remove emotional triggers, what it allows them to do is move freely again. Because it doesn't matter what car drives by. It doesn't matter what perfume somebody wears that walks past. It doesn't matter if you've been to that pub and had a good time with your ex. You don't have an emotional response anymore. So that obviously is a huge indication that healing is happening, when all of a sudden, they realize, oh, I actually reacted completely differently to 2 months ago, because there was no button to push. Right. Usually it also reflects in personal relationships, where, when somebody learns to put boundaries in place. So the people that are meant to be in your life, they will be, and the people there will be people that won't like it and they leave. But that's okay as well. And like for me, just witnessing that transformation, it's the most beautiful thing, because the first time I talk to somebody, they are a mess, right? I mean, there are people, same as I was, they can't promise that they still be around tomorrow, because they think they are at the end of the road. And then you see them 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, and they already know, they sit down with you and this is their special time and this is where change is happening, and they smile, and so yeah, it's beautiful.
And what would you say somebody who's completely healed, what do they look like, and what do they what characteristics do they have?
They you will notice that they are very content in themselves. You will be able to feel it, when you interact with somebody who is in fight or flight. You can feel it. right? It's like an energy. When you're around somebody who is actually done their deep healing work, there will be the sense of calm, which is really contagious as well. And people will comment on it, like you will actually find people that look for your company or your closeness. Like sometimes it happens to me even in a cafe or in a bar where somebody just sits way too close for comfort, but they don't realize that they are doing that, that it's just like an energy thing. And when you do your healing work, deep healing work outside of the cognitive function, you just become so authentic and unapologetically yourself. And you're true to your values, you're true to your needs, you have healthy boundaries in place. And then what happens is that when our inside changes, the outside also changes. And what you will find is with people that really do their healing work is that their life also becomes very authentic. They couldn't even have a different life because it's just their life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, there will always be something. That's how life works, right? There will always be people that push our buttons, whether that's in a relationship or not. We very rarely push our own buttons, right? So it's not really about an end destination, I don't think. It's more about having your toolbox, right? Your ever growing toolbox, and staying curious and trying out different things. And some will work and others don't work. Whatever works for you, you put it in your toolbox. And that allows you to lead your life in a very different way. Because if there is something bad happening, which will happen, you get your toolbox out, right? So your toolbox is for you as much as it is for your client.
So it's really about empowerment, from victim mode to empowerment, the whole
and then becoming really self-sufficient, right?
Wonderful. We have a question here, and guys, you can ask questions if you want. I'm going to read it out. If after teaching the client the techniques, the emotional response is still really high, would you suggest there is more trauma to resolve? My client works really hard at regulation, but it only stays for a short while, then returns, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a difference between regulation and resolving the trauma. Like if we, for example, is everybody familiar with the havening touch? Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there are various different applications for havening, right? Where you can really remove emotional charges, things like that. When I teach my client, I teach them their self-havening touch so they can regulate themselves. That hasn't resolved the issue, right? So the cause of the misregulation is still present. So that needs a deeper intervention in whatever way, whatever you choose to do. Just the regulation tool itself is not going to resolve it. So yes, then when the trigger, the emotional trigger is still happening, then of course we need to explore what is it that's firing off here. And we're human beings, so we always feel something before we do something, right? So at that point, when somebody can self-regulate, but it doesn't actually resolve the trigger, it's really about finding out what is this about, and then dive deeper with, hypnosis, inner child work, time-based techniques, timeline therapy. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do, but because it's so multi-layered, it's a mix and match of various different things.
Yeah, so do you give your clients a really big toolbox then? Besides havening, what else do you teach them?
I teach them self-hypnosis. Like once they are in a state of, safely being able to access that state. And I have, like, there's a lot of like NLP, like little stuff. I have my book. It's called Me, Myself, and I, which is based on my group coaching program. And this is full with like over 50 like little things, that you can do. So I wouldn't do that with my clients in the sessions because we do the deep dive work, but then I give that to them and they can actually, those are little things you can just build into your day-to-day life. And it's really, as I said, for me, it's all about being curious and trying out different things. So what I like to do is I obviously do havening and hypnosis and NLP. Those are like my tools, or which are plenty. But I might also give somebody like an introduction into whatever, breath work or various different things, just for them to be curious. And then if somebody is, I refer them on. I think a lot of coaches and therapists, they just keep studying, right? Adding all the strings to the bow, which is a good thing. But you don't need to be a practitioner in everything, right? Because we have a big network. And if somebody gets curious, then I just refer them on, same as other people may refer people to me. But I know I'm very good at what I do. And I don't need to be able to do everything. Like sometimes I have a client who would like to try out EMDR or IEMT. I could train in it.
Yeah.
But I also have friends who actually are very good practitioners. So I just send them that way.
Yeah. And you were talking about, as you were talking about referring on, when do you not take on clients or refer them to a mental health provider, for example? Because I know that when you are deeply traumatized from such a relationship, you can actually, go other directions as well, mental health wise. So when would you...
So I mean, those are the kind of people I work with, because I'm at the end point of that healing journey, if you will. What I don't work with is people that are still in that relationship, people that are still figuring things out, people that are still in contact with their abuser. That's where I would refer to counseling, for example, when in the beginning, because we're going through different motions, in the beginning, it's all about the logistics. You need your cognitive function to put the pieces together, to figuring things out, to, making sure to get out in a safe way, those kind of things. That's what you need your conscious mind for. That's not a part of the healing journey where I am positioned. Right. So that's, for example, something that I would refer on. Or if somebody presents mental health challenges that go outside of complex post-traumatic stress or borderline personality disorder, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't, I'm not trained like that. So if somebody, for example, would present schizophrenia or something like that, like I would refer that on, because that's outside of my comfort zone. It's outside of my skill set. So I'm very, very clear. And that's also why I have that application process. And it's quite diligent. It's like 36 questions. And then there is still a phone interview after that, because that's the way that I can protect myself as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Okay. Right. Okay. So your answer to the last question, the situation is still current, so it makes sense. Thank you. Okay. And the next question is, would you say that domestic violence victims usually have or had a narcissistic partner? Domestic violence.
I mean, narcissistic abuse is domestic violence, right? So it can go hand in. So I guess we're talking about physical violence, sexual violence, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Are they all domestic violent people? Are they all narcissists? I guess is the question. If I understand it right. Yes, that's what she means.
Probably. I mean, you have to have a certain wiring in your brain where you don't actually care what harm you're causing to somebody else. And as I said, it usually goes hand in hand in those situations. But then, of course, narcissistic abuse in itself, emotional, psychological abuse in itself, is already extremely detrimental. It's not like, oh, it's just a byproduct of those domestic violence cases. It's its own thing. But usually, yes, because it's the same thing. If we think about trauma bonding, for example, And trauma bonding is quite complex. I do whole lectures just on trauma bonding.
Mm.
Something like that will happen in any kind of domestic violence situation, right? Because there is like this hot and cold, and people stay. People don't only stay because they're afraid. People also stay because they're trauma bonded, because there are those 5 minutes where that guy that just, or woman, who beat their partner up, and then 5 minutes later they're so kind and apologetic and whatever. So it's the same kind of concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next question. Do you find after your clients have refound their authentic selves that they stop attracting those people who have narcissistic tendencies, but rather repel them?
Yes, and that's what happens when you deal with the faulty programming, right? Because that carrot that I was talking about earlier disappears.
Mm.
So what happens is it's not like the narcissists disappear from the face of the earth because we already know they're everywhere. But what will happen is that carrot isn't attractive anymore. The narcissist has nothing to offer,
Yeah.
but then you also have nothing to offer to the narcissist because they wouldn't get out of you what they're looking for, right?
Mm.
So that basically then results in you going separate ways.
Mm.
So and they will cross your path, but the difference is it's not a cognitive thing. It's not like you go through your red flag checklist and go like, oh, that's a narcissist.
Mm.
It comes from within. You just walk away, and it's easy because there's literally no exchange there happening.
Mm. So what is a narcissist looking for in you as a victim?
uh what are they looking for? They want somebody that they can make feel worse so
Mm.
they can feel better,
Mm.
right? They're narcissists that they are looking for a rescuer. um the vulnerable narcissist, they might look for admiration, for validation. They come in so many different forms. It's
Mm.
actually quite difficult to say because some are just very overt, and then there are other ones that are covert where you wouldn't even think in the first moment that they are narcissistic.
Mm.
But they might look for affection, they might look for love, because obviously it also comes from an unfulfilled need,
Mm.
right? So but the difference with them is, even though we might have the same need, the same fear, the same insecurity, as a narcissist you don't even think about bettering yourself or doing something about it.
Mm.
Whereas, an empath who then realizes, oh shit, there's actually something that I'm contributing to this whole thing, will then go in and look for help.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's same wounds, different outcome, basically.
Yes, yes. It's
Okay.
like a different strategy, right? And
Yeah.
and that strategy that was implemented unconsciously when we were very little,
Mm.
right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to survive. We all want to be loved. We all want to belong. And then, someone might, in the same household, they might grow up the same way, but one of the siblings decides to shut down any kind of emotion, where then the emotional processing is inhibited.
Mm.
And the other sibling might do the exact opposite and sacrifice themselves for love to obviously like their detriment.
Yeah.
The
Uh,
work would be the same, but as I said, a narcissist would not come to you for help.
yeah.
That's
That's
the difference.
yeah. Do you have any more resources? I mean, we've seen your book. Is that on Amazon or where?
Yes, you can get it on Amazon, and I have it for men as well. I know we don't have men in the group right now,
Mm.
but because there are very little resources for men, I wrote one for men as well. That's on Amazon.
Hmm.
You can check out my website. It's roniafraser.com. I'm going to have a 2-day workshop after the conference in Dublin, after the hypnosis conference in Dublin, which is actually the book as a workshop. So it's going to be very practical. It's also CPD accredited. So because it's all about building the toolbox, right, for the clients and for ourselves. And yeah, that's at the moment everything I have planned in the UK.
Right. So the workshop is in person in Dublin?
In person in Dublin, the 7th and 8th of April, I believe, the Monday and Tuesday after the conference.
Yeah. So
And it's for survivors and therapists. And some of us are survivors themselves. So, I mean, if anyone would like to get their CPD hours in early, please do come join me and hop over to Dublin. It's 7th and 8th of April.
Yeah, that brings us nicely to the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference,
Yes.
which we are promoting with these talks. So Ronia is going to talk about narcissistic abuse and how to help survivors in much more detail than she has here, and probably not as personal as you have here. So thank you very much for giving us your time and telling us so many things. And yeah, the Dublin conference, the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference, is happening on the 4th and 5th. There is no, 5th and 6th. I get it wrong every time. The weekend of the 5th of April. And then you have the workshop on the 7th and 8th, correct?
That's right.
There we go. Oh God, I got it the other way around yesterday.
Yeah.
I will put the details into the notes, into the show notes. I will put Ronia's website and the book in there as well. And do get your tickets and do come to the workshop. It's going to be amazing and very enlightening, I'm quite sure.
Yeah. And if anyone has any questions, because I know usually there are much more questions, and we're a bit tight on time, but if anybody has any questions or any thoughts you would like to share, please do feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you all guys for coming, and I see lots of thank yous in the chat. So yeah, wonderful. Thanks for coming.
I'm gonna have a look in the chat.
Thanks for watching the replay if you are watching the replay, and hopefully see you soon in Dublin. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.